What up, Internet? My name's Daniel. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a hobby baker. And today we're making a simple sandwich bread and talking about managing emotions. I want to discuss two different frameworks for understanding emotional reactions and how to process and manage your emotions. Emotions are complex, and there are several theories on how emotions happen and where they originate. Most theories discuss an importance of somatic or interoceptive cues, meaning a physical sensation that might communicate something to the brain. The limbic system in the brain can use these cues and create meaning out of the experience. Now, this is an oversimplified explanation of the process, but for our purposes, this basic understanding of body cues is important, especially for this framework that we'll talk about first, called affect assembly. Now, affect assembly is something I do with clients in an attempt to slow down any emotional reactions. It's especially helpful when emotions are live in the room while I'm working with couples, for example. So the way this process works, to assemble the emotion first, I want to know what was the cue or trigger to the emotional response. This could be a tone of voice, rolling eyes, etc. And next, I'm asking for the immediate appraisal, meaning the first instant or instinctual thought in that moment. And I'll talk a little bit more about an example later. The next aspect is bodily arousal, meaning what did you notice in your body? I found that many clients have a hard time initially tuning into their body. I might say, what did you notice in your body, or what physical feeling accompanied that moment when you heard her say blah blah blah. And I often get a response like, I just felt frustrated, or I felt sad, which could be a label on the feeling in the moment, but it's not a physical sensation. So if you're working through this affect assembly on your own, please make sure you slow down and identify the physical sensation. Next, as we make sense of all this, we may go through a process called reappraisal, meaning after some time experiencing this, how do we connect these feelings or this moment to any previous moments or understandings of ourself or of relationships, of whatever's happening in the moment. And the last step is action tendency. So when you're making sense of this moment, what do you find yourself doing? How do you respond or react? Whether that be moving towards something, running away, hiding, pulling out your phone and disengaging, or on a positive note, maybe jumping up or giving a hug or something like that. So to give an example of slowing down an emotion, let's look at this story of George and Rachel in their living room. George and Rachel are discussing money stress and budgets. George begins to explain his view of the stress and says, "It's like I always say." But in that moment, Rachel rolls her eyes and sarcastically says, yeah, like you always say," and turns away from George and begins cleaning up the living room and stops speaking. Conversation over. Now if we go back and slow this moment down, what just happened for Rachel? If we build the emotion, and the trigger or cue might be George saying, "It's like I always say." Or it might be specifically the tone of voice that he used, that maybe she interpreted as condescending. And so the immediate appraisal or first gut thought might have been something like, "Here we go again." The immediate appraisal also has to do with whether we're interpreting the thing as positive or negative, as threatening or pleasant. And so in this case, she obviously saw it as negative. Body arousal might include a tightness in her chest, tension in her muscles. The reappraisal, or how she might make sense of it, could be telling herself, "George thinks I'm stupid or not smart enough to handle money. That's why he talks to me like a child. He thinks he's better than me, and he can lecture me like he's my father." And the action tendency was turning away, disengaging. Rachel does not like to be lectured, so she shuts it down with sarcasm and an eye roll. Again, these cues and appraisals could also be positive, but this can be a helpful practice to review previous emotional reactions of yourself. Start with memories that maybe your emotional response or reaction was more intense than you might have thought it should be, or you regretted it, how intensely you reacted, or maybe surprised yourself at how strongly you reacted to something, and see if you can slow down that moment and begin to gain some insight into your own emotional responses. The second framework that could be helpful at managing emotions comes from AEDP, called the change triangle. The change triangle offers an image of a triangle pointing downwards. At the bottom are core emotions, which are often described as joy, fear, sadness, anger, disgust, excitement, and sexual excitement. The top left corner is defenses, or anything we do to avoid emotions. Moving along the triangle from there in a positive direction to the other side before moving down to the core emotions are inhibitory emotions, such as shame, guilt, and anxiety. Using bodily sensations, the change triangle can be used as a tool to map where you are and how to progress through the triangle. The word emotion comes from a Latin word that means to move out or to move through. The wisdom of emotions comes when we can move through the emotion to think about and choose what we want to do with that emotion or in that moment. The goal of the change triangle is to be able to map yourself out on the triangle and attempt to move through it towards the core emotions. I'll try to provide another story for example. And quick disclaimer, this story is fictional and provided as an example, not a retelling of any particular client I have seen. So we'll call him James, was discussing a time when he encountered something difficult in the last week and had a memory of a time he was mocked as a child by his older brother and called names. He began to chuckle as he said it and was like, "Yeah, but it's fine." I pointed out that he often laughs about hard things and seems to diminish the weight of it. This is the defense behavior. Now, defense behaviors may not always be conscious, but we can become more aware of them the more we practice. Since he had practiced the change triangle before, he was aware of this and was able to turn his attention back to his body. He noticed a flutter in his chest as he recalled the story and tension in his muscles. He said there was some anxiety as he had first told the story, and the difficulty sharing it without making the joke because he was anxious how he might be perceived. So it was easier to make it not a big deal himself. As he continued to work the change triangle, he identified sadness as his core emotion. Sadness at the fact that his brother would call him the things that he did. Sadness about an idea that brothers are family, and family's not supposed to be like that or talk to each other like that. He was able to sit with the sadness long enough that he also realized the anxiety was also about the idea that if he allowed the sadness to be, he might be overwhelmed by it. But again, the wisdom of emotions is to allow them to move us through to something else. After James let himself feel sad, he was able to come to a sense of acceptance of the memory as that was not okay, but he could offer a sense of forgiveness for his brother. I'll attach an article in the description with more examples and discussion about the change triangle if you found this helpful. My hope is you can notice that emotions move quickly, and it takes real effort to slow down emotional responses and make sense of them in a way that can move us somewhere and teach us something. It may take some work, but the work is definitely worth it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.